on Pearl Harbor. Japan bombed Pearl Harbor on Sunday, December 7th, 1941. Japan did this in an attempt to destroy the U.S. carrier fleet.
It was a very destructive and terrible event in America's history. It consisted of two waves. The first one consisted of 183 planes, the second one 168.
In the end, nearly 20 ships and more than 300 airplanes were destroyed or severely damaged, and over 3,000 people were either killed or wounded.
This attack was also a crucial point in World War II. The attack relates to the theme of turning points in history because it changed the whole course of World War II. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, they basically shot themselves in the foot. This is because Japan celebrated their attack, but it was this attack that led to them surrendering 4 years later. The attack on Pearl Harbor stunned lots of Americans because it was a surprise attack to them, but Japan had been planning it for more than 4 decades.
President Franklin Delano Roosevelt responded by saying a speech called "A Date Which Will Live in Infamy." This speech was basically about how Japan's attack was surprising and caused very much damage, and how Japan has taken on extremely surprising and defensive exterior or character. His speech was also about how in the last 24 years, Japan has attacked 6 other places.
But the most important part of his speech was the ending, in which he asked Congress to declare war on Japan. This is because the U.S. could no longer avoid active fight.
The 2 Illinois senators at the time were Scott W. Lucas and C. Wayland Bucks. When they were asked to vote, they both voted yes.
By the end of the vote, there was only one person who voted no, and that person was Congresswoman Jeanette Rankin.
The U.S. was officially in war on December 11, 1941. A few days later, Germany and Italy declared war on America, and America became officially involved in World War II.
On May 7, 1945, Germany officially surrendered. They did this for a few reasons. These include the fact that the Allies were ready to invade and the fact that Adolf Hitler had died on April 30, 1945, only a few days earlier. D-Day was one of the bloodiest battles in history, and it definitely contributed to World War II, killing 6,000 German soldiers and destroying their confidence. D-Day practically made the result of World War II what it was. And without the U.S., D-Day would not have been possible.
This is because of a couple of reasons. 1. The U.S. coordinated their military to land on the beaches of Normandy, France, with the Canadian and British military forces. Another one, the U.S. lost the second most number of soldiers with 2,501, and that was out of the 4,414 Allied soldiers that died.
As Japan industrialized during the late 19th century, it sought to imitate Western countries like the U.S., which had established colonies in Asia and the Pacific Ocean to secure natural resources and markets for their goods. However, Japan's process of imperial expansion put it on a collision course with the U.S.
During the lead-up to their entry into World War II, much of the American efforts were geared towards cracking Japan's code, especially as tensions started to rise between the two nations.
Shortly before the outbreak of the war in the Pacific, the United States started to look into and decipher what was known as the Japanese Purple Machine.
If they found the Purple Machine, they would need to find someone who could use and decode the messages that they needed to decode. After getting their eyes on the Purple Machine, they hired William Friedman.
After a year of working on the machine, Friedman suffered a mental breakdown. With the leader of the deciphering team not at work, the U.S. hired other cryptologists. The team and his assistant, Frank Rowell, created 8 replicas of the Purple Machine.
Soon after that, the encryption method was unlocked. But that wasn't all. They still had to determine the daily key. The key was clearly cracked by L.T. Francis A. Raven.
When the U.S. unlocked the Purple Machine, they gained access to Japan's Foreign Office communications, but it still wasn't enough. Even though they had all the communications, they couldn't find anything on the attack on Pearl Harbor.
The cryptologists were watching the code and they found a potential attack, but not at the location it happened, nor on that day. During World War II, Japan was careful not to put out too much information during the communications.
In conclusion, when Japan decided to attack Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, they made a huge mistake that would cost them less than 4 years later. This is because the attack was a huge turning point in history, as it completely changed the course of World War II and practically predicted the outcome in the end.
This is all because of the bombing. It was so destructive and mortal, making it extremely significant in U.S. history, that the U.S. had no choice but to join the war. And by joining the Allies had enough power to defeat both Germany and Japan.
Therefore, Japan quite literally shot themselves in the foot by choosing to bomb Pearl Harbor and anger the U.S., or as President Theodore Roosevelt said decades earlier, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." This means that the United States would prefer peace, but if tested, the United States will respond with force.
So in the end, Japan did realize their mistake, but they realized it too late.